Right, guys, I want to put together a couple of different sort of videos for you, or talks, or lectures, or whatever way you want to describe them, that I think is going to help you a wee bit understand what's happening with your body, what's happening from a weight gain point of view, what's happening from a struggle to lose weight point of view, specifically for people over the age of 40, and more specifically women in the perimenopause and menopause. And you have to understand this to be able to make the right decisions when it comes to nutrition and exercise. Because it's easy to turn around and say, this diet didn't work for me, or this doesn't work for me, or that didn't work for me, or this does work, and that doesn't work. You have to actually know from a biological, sort of physiological point of view, what's actually happening to your body at the minute. And it's really important to understand these things. So to try and get to the final sort of conclusion, I'm going to have to break this down into a couple of different videos, because there's so many parts to this. There's so many sort of working parts that lead to this is why you've gained weight, or this is why you struggle to lose weight. It's not just as simple as overeating. In fact, it's never just as simple as that. So it's understanding the whole sort of endocrinology, physiology, biology of everything that's actually happening. So we'll try and bring these down into different wee compartments, and then we'll see how they all sort of come together. So the main player here for males, females, everything, is cortisol, stress hormone, and we all know this. Now again, it's important to understand the role of cortisol normally in the body, and how anything that applies stress, for example exercise, for example fasting, for example any sort of calorie restriction, emotional stress, financial stress, environmental stress, they're all stressors, and how your body reacts by releasing cortisol and what cortisol actually does. Right, so we'll start there. Then in the next video we'll talk about things like mitochondria, which is the energy factor of the cell, insulin resistance. We need to go into that. We need to go into the way the body actually, what is fat, how does fat actually get stored, and how does it get released and stuff like that. So you'll hear me talk about wee bits and pieces in each one of those, and then hopefully at the end of the last video it'll all sort of come together. But it's really important that we get a basic fundamental understanding of each part of it before we can put the thing together. Because again, I'm a strong believer is if we want to apply something, we need application, then we need information. Without information, there's no application. We can't apply something if you don't know why you're doing it. So for me to give someone, say, a nutrition plan or nutrition advice, I think it falls on deaf ears unless you actually understand, why am I doing this? So when it comes to a time where, oh shit, I'm getting sugar cravings, I really want something sweet. If you actually understand, well, okay, what is actually happening? Why am I feeling this? What's going on in my body? Why am I getting these cravings? Why am I finding it hard to diet? Why am I low in energy? Why am I feeling moody? Why are all these things happening to me that I just want to go and just eat? It's easier than to say, oh, if I make this choice over this choice, or if I understand how I'm feeling, I can make better choices, rather than just say, well, fuck it, I'll get back on track tomorrow, and it doesn't happen. So it's important to understand a couple of fundamentals here. So we're going to talk about cortisol first, the stress hormone. Now this can happen anytime there's stress. Now we'll basically run down to what stress actually is and how it operates. Now the first thing we have to understand is stress all starts off in the brain, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is sort of a wee computer factory of the brain. It sort of picks up in your blood what's going on, but it also links down to sort of the parts of the brain that sort of operate everything: perception, awareness, what you see, what you think, what you feel, all those kind of stuff. Then you've got your pituitary gland. So what happens is we get the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and then adrenal gland. That's how it works. So it goes from the pituitary gland, or the hypothalamus, to the pituitary, which is the back of the neck, and then to the adrenal glands, which is two wee sort of chestnut-sized things that sit on top of your kidneys. And that's called hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis meaning they're all connected. So it's a sense of signal right down the whole thing. So you have to understand that as well too, to understand exactly what's happening here. So let's say there's a perceived stress. I've explained this to most of you before, but we'll do it again anyway. The stress is actually a good thing. We adapt to stress, it makes you stronger. Cortisol is actually a good hormone. It's actually pretty good. And when you start to hear about this, it's going to sound a wee bit counterintuitive, but then again, when we put it all together, you'll understand. Cortisol is what I would actually call an energy mobilizing hormone. So it mobilizes energy. Now you're thinking, well, is that not good? Yes, it is actually good. So let's say a saber-toothed tiger jumps to the door and wants to kill me, right? Then I need to release energy, because remember, we're talking from an evolutionary point of view over hundreds of millions of years, or hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. I may have gone maybe a period of time with no food. I have no calories coming in. I've been out looking for food for 2 or 3 weeks. I'm about to starve to death, saber-toothed tiger jumps out. Where do I get the energy from for a fight or flight, to run me, save my life, or a fight or whatever? Well, what happens is cortisol comes and it actually releases energy into the bloodstream. So it'll break down glycogen, which is stored muscle energy, convert it back into glucose to put it into the system so it's ready to use straight away. It will also break down muscle tissue. Alright, and it will break down muscle tissue and can break it down into its single amino acids. So it goes back down to the basic sort of carbon particles. That carbon particles can go in the liver, and the liver can process that back into glycogen again. Alright, so again, the glucose. It's all about getting blood sugars elevated, because I need to run and fight and save my life. But it also mobilizes fat cells. So it'll break down fat, it'll liberate fat. Remember, fat, I hope you remember this from videos that we've done before, is basically a triglyceride. So basically it's 3 fatty molecules on a triglyceride, or a glycerol molecule, like a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty molecules attached to it. And what it does, actually severs the glycerol from the fatty molecules to liberate the fat. They go into the system, it'll go into the liver, and the liver will convert that into glucose and get the blood sugars elevated, ready to go. And that process of breaking things down is called gluconeogenesis. Gluco meaning glucose, neo meaning new, and genesis means it's making it from other things that's not carbohydrate based. So for example, it'll turn fat, it'll turn protein. Same turns, but a sort of wrong terminology, but it'll convert it through different processes and different enzymatic sort of functions back into glucose, so your blood sugar level will be elevated. Now remember, when blood sugar levels are elevated, the next hormone that we need then is insulin. Insulin's got to come then and put that energy into the cell to be able to use. So we get an elevation of blood glucose and we get an elevation of insulin. We know this by, if you were to do your resting blood glucose as soon as you wake up in the morning, so you wake up, you do a cortisol test and a glucose test, your cortisol and your glucose will be elevated. You're thinking, why? I've been sleeping for maybe 10 hours. There's been no food coming in. Well, basically, your circadian rhythm, because daylight starts to come in, will start to release cortisol. Cortisol will then liberate energy from somewhere. They wake you up, they give you energy to go and find food. All right, so but that's what we call an acute stress response, or a time of fasting, time of starving. I have no food, I haven't eaten in a week. Where am I going to get the energy to go and find food, or to kill something? Cortisol come, it'll liberate energy, it'll bring it back up, and then you'll have the energy to do it. But that's called an acute stress response. Same with exercise. Exercise is stressful. That's why cortisol breaks down and liberates fat for fuel, so you can use that fat during your workout, which is why exercise induces weight loss. And also then building strength and hypertrophy and everything else as well too. But I don't want to talk about that, but I want to talk about the liberation of energy. So cortisol, for all intents and purposes, is quite good. It's very, very useful. And we would die if you didn't have any. You would literally starve to death, right? Because there'd be no energy being released. Right, so that's an acute stress response. Acute response and then relax. So the perceived danger would then disappear, and we would go from a sympathetic nervous system day and parasympathetic to your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means automatic, and it's all down to the hypothalamus in the brain. Now, you may have heard of something called Cushing's disease or Cushing's syndrome. You will know this by, if you ever see someone who has a bit of what they call a moon face, a big round face, a big sort of hump in the back, very skinny limbs, very skinny arms and legs, all belly, and for women, all boobs, and specifically a lot of stretch marks. They get a lot of stretch marks. This is called Cushing disease or Cushing syndrome. And what happens here, they actually get a tumour on the pituitary gland, right, which then over amplifies the pituitary adrenal cortex, that system, and overstimulates that signal. They go from the pituitary gland to the adrenal glands, so the adrenal glands just keep pumping out 24/7. So you're thinking, right, well, if they're pumping out 24/7 and it's liberating fat, then how's this person getting fatter? What's actually happening here, you'll see their limbs get very thin, the cortisol starts to break down muscle tissue and converts that into fat. Now, the reason it does that, or the way that it does this, is called a thing called LPL, lipoprotein lipase. Now again, don't worry about all the big names, but I have to say the names in my head to be able to remember where we're going with all this, right? So I'm not saying it to try and baffle you, I'm just saying because it helps me remember, but I visualized all the things that are happening through the names and terminology. So lipoprotein lipase basically tells the body to burn fat, liberate fat. That's how it does it. So cortisol will activate LPL, LPL will go to the triglycerides, release that. But what it does, it only releases it from certain parts of the body, for example, the arms and the legs. It then tells it, because cortisol has been elevated for quite a long time, which is now chronic stress response, it thinks it's about to fucking die. So what it does, it redistributes the fat into visceral fat. So it'll take subcutaneous fat, which is the spongy stuff on the outside, which for all intents and purposes is actually what we would call the healthy fat. There's no real danger of subcutaneous fat. It doesn't really do anything that bad, except you've probably had a poor diet and excess calories to put it on, but the fat itself isn't inherently unhealthy or dangerous. The process of getting it there is obviously because you haven't been moving, you've been overeating, but that's all storage of fat. It's just stored energy. But what it does, it liberates the visceral or the subcutaneous fat and stores it as visceral fat. That's fat accumulation around the organs. So what you'll find is your belly will get harder, not as spongy, harder, but more distended, more bigger, and the limbs sometimes get thinner, but you basically lose a lot of muscle tissue. So your body's breaking down muscle tissue, breaking down subcutaneous fat, and storing it all as visceral fat. So this is why we need to be very careful if we over diet or overtrain. This is why, for example, we do 3 30-minute sessions in the gym, no more, because again, we're inducing stress. So if we're just cortisol on top of cortisol on top of cortisol, it's really just making the situation very, very worse. Does that make sense? So that's the role that cortisol is playing from an acute stress response and a chronic stress response. The chronic stress response is literally a catabolic hormone. Now, it's actually a steroid hormone. Steroid hormone means it's made from cholesterol. Remember, your steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol, they're all made from cholesterol. This is why things like statins just end up killing you, because the body can't make these hormones, these steroidal hormones. And it's also what they do, see if you take like a cortisone injection for pain, that's cortisol, exact same thing, because it's also anti-inflammatory. So there is good benefits to cortisol. We do need it. It's a stress response, but it's that chronic stress response that we don't want. Right? So try and remember everything we're talking about here, about how the body's actually storing fat, and we need to reduce cortisol. Cortisol is the key. Now again, if this is happening within the body for whatever mechanism, for example, Cushing's disease because of a tumour or a lesion or something on the pituitary gland, which means it overstimulates the adrenal cortex, or if it's because of, which we'll get into in the next video, how perimenopause and also men having low testosterone causes the same effect, right? So everything we just talked about will be happening in your body if you're a man with low testosterone, or a woman through perimenopause and menopause, because cortisol levels are elevated. In the next video, we'll talk about why cortisol levels are elevated because of those things, right? And also what happens here from a mood point of view. Why do we have sugar cravings and why do we overeat? So try and think about what we're talking about there. Cortisol is good. It actually releases energy and elevates blood glucose. We need it to wake up in the morning, otherwise you just wouldn't have the energy to get up and go and look for food. It's an adaptogen, which means it helps you adapt to stress. So for example, if I apply a wee bit of stress, the body has to adapt to become stronger so it can cope with that, so it's not as impactful. It breaks down muscle tissue, which is not too good, and it also helps to, it'll also elevate LPL, which is lipoprotein lipase, which is an enzyme that releases fat from mobilization. But if it's overstimulated, it will then redistribute that fat into visceral fat. Alright, so try and remember those for the next video, and if you have any questions, please let me know.